This is episode 15 of Ring Awareness. Guys, you know who I am. It's Adam Merrick, your host, bringing you the latest happenings with what's going on in professional wrestling right here in our own state, New Mexico. And this is the first episode of July. It's been 6 months since I started Ring Awareness. I've got to thank you guys for listening to the episodes that have come so far. I've had a lot of great interviews. If you've missed any, please go back and check them out. And again, just thank you for supporting Ring Awareness. I appreciate it. As a treat for you guys, I've got a guest today that I know everybody's wanted to hear from. Somebody who's loved by just about anybody who's attended a wrestling show live here in Albuquerque or somewhere in New Mexico. You guys all know him. Without further ado, let's give it up for my guest, episode 15, Hobo Hank.
Adam, thank you very much. How are you today?
I'm doing great, man. Again, you're one of the wrestlers I've wanted to have on the show for quite a while. A lot of the fan demand has been high for you. A lot of people obviously enjoy Hobo Hank, enjoy the character.
Right. Well, I appreciate that very much. I'm glad to be here.
Of course. Well, let's start from the beginning like I always do. As far as how you got your start in a career, how did it come about?
Well, I don't think my story is any different than anybody starting out. When I was about 7 years old when I started watching wrestling. I was a huge WWF fan. You know, my upbringing was a little different than most. I think I wasn't raised by my parents. I was raised by my great-grandmother.
Okay.
And my great-grandfather, and he had Alzheimer's. And my great-grandmother was in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. So at a very young age, I had to be very responsible. I took care of them. I took care of the house. I cooked, cleaned, all of that. You know, I found wrestling was like the perfect escape for me. That was the time when I could just kind of tune out and watch something and be involved in something that took me away from my daily life a little bit.
Nice.
So I grew up and those were my role models. I mean, you know, Jake the Snake Roberts and Hulk Hogan and Bret Hitman Hart. Those guys they turned into father figures, I guess, in a way.
Okay.
So I loved it from a very early age. I used to stay up late and watch Wrestling Challenge, and I would tape all the shows, and that was on VHS back then. So
what's that? What's
yeah,
VHS?
Exactly, right? Showing my age. I'm not that old. I'm only 33, but yeah, I mean, back in that day, WWF reigned supreme, and that was my entire world revolved around that. Posters in my room, every waking moment, and I decided probably 8 years old that this is what I wanted to do for a living someday. I wanted to make it to the WWF.
Oh, wow. That young.
Absolutely.
And how did you start beginning that trek to eventually get trained and start that journey?
Well, you know, it's hard back in those days. You know, the world has changed a lot in the last 25 years. There was no internet.
Mm-hmm.
A smart mark didn't exist. That wasn't even a term. So there really was no way to know how to get into the business. When I went into high school, I was 13, I was a freshman in high school, and I decided that it just made sense if I was going to be a wrestler that I needed to wrestle. I actually went to school. I went to middle school with Jeff the Ref and with Mosh Pit Mike.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we've known each other since we were probably 11 or 12 years old. Best friends since then.
Wow.
So one day we were in high school, and I saw the wrestling tryout poster was on the wall, and I grabbed Mosh and I grabbed Jeff and I said, let's go be wrestlers, guys. So we went in there, and long story short, Jeff did not decide to pursue the wrestling. I don't think they had, you know, referees at that point,
right.
13-year-old, but Mosh stuck with it. I stuck with it. I only went to high school for a semester. Again, I ended up leaving school to take care of my grandmother.
Oh, okay.
A little later on, but during that time, Mosh and I got into it. Mosh actually ended up staying with the wrestling program all throughout high school. He and I did a tournament the next year, I think, for freestyle wrestling. It was just kind of a summer program, but we both ended up taking state for freestyle wrestling. Lo and behold, found out that really wasn't the way to become a professional wrestler. So I wouldn't say it was wasted time, though. I mean, it gave me some experience, and there's definitely some things I use from those days in the ring today. But basically, I moved to Los Lunas shortly after that. I was about 14 years old, and the first day I moved into my new house, I went to the grocery store and I met my wife.
Oh, wow.
So I've been with my wife since I was 14,
Oh, geez.
coming up on 19 years together. You know, one of the initial meetings with her mom, my now mother-in-law, I was telling her that I always wanted to be a professional wrestler, and she didn't laugh like most people did, or make the comments. She actually said, I know a couple guys that do that.
Uh-huh.
And of course I was skeptical, but right before my 15th birthday, we drove down south of Belen, and she introduced me to a gentleman named Leo Luna. He used to wrestle as the Savage. He toured some of the WWF undercards back in the day, and did a lot of work regionally.
Okay.
And then Ernest the Animal Baca, who I will absolutely credit with having trained me. Both of those guys were phenomenal. So they introduced me. I was 14 at the time. I probably weighed 163 pounds, soaking wet.
Uh-huh.
And I walked into the gym. They had a gym out behind the trailer house there. It was a big metal building. The ring that was in it actually was the ring that they used to work in the Civic Center back in the day.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, it was a lot of history in that ring.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think the mat had been changed. It was just coated with blood and whatever.
Wow.
It was a very, very, very hard ring. There was no give, no springs. And they said, well, if you want to be a pro wrestler, let's see what you can do. And just as the old, again, it's been a long time since I started, and these guys wrestled back in the 70s, and it was a very different world back then. They don't just let people, they don't just walk into the wrestling business. Kayfabe was a very real thing back then, and
Yeah.
that was what they were taught to do, was to preserve the illusion.
It's like a magic show.
Absolutely. Nobody sees behind the curtain.
Exactly.
It's more like the mafia, actually. Nobody gets in, and once they're in, they never get out.
Oh, yeah.
But they beat the hell out of me, and that is no joke. I mean, all night long, the first night, all they did is pick me up and slam me and smack me around and punch me. And
Was it just you, or were you the only trainee?
I was the only trainee. There was a couple of workers there. I showed up. Again, I didn't know the unwritten law. I didn't know that I wasn't allowed on the premises when they were working out.
Okay.
But I walked in. As soon as I walked in, everything stopped. No moves were performed, nothing. They just took me in the ring and worked me over. And they told me, if you want to come back, you come back, this night, this time, and we'll work out again. And
Wow.
I did. I went back, obviously. They did it again. It was just me and these two 300-pound guys. Navajo Frank Seiss, too. I don't know if anybody goes back that far here, but Navajo Frank was a big star back in the 60s, 70s. He wrestled regionally a lot through California, Arizona, New Mexico. He used to work with Ricky Romero and
Oh, yeah.
and those guys a lot. Frank was absolutely a big influence on me at that time too. But anyway, basically three workouts was the routine. If you could get beat up 3 nights in a row by these guys and take it and still want to come back, then they would start to teach you what was going on.
Oh, okay.
And
So that was like your initiation.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yep. Yeah, I came back the 4th night. They were shocked to see me, I'm sure, and it was time to learn how to roll. So they took me under their wing. They trained me. I was still too young. I was so I turned 15, I think, that week.
Okay.
They trained me for a couple months, and by training I mean 6 nights a week, 4 hours a night. We were there all the time. When they felt I was ready, they got me booked in a show in Texas. I think it was in Borger, Texas, if I'm not mistaken. It was a very small town on the west side of Texas.
Okay.
Well, the deal was that I was 15, and you had to be 18 to wrestle. That's the law. So we decided to put a mask on me. So I bought a mask, had flames all over it. I bought pants with flames on it, and started calling myself the Fireman.
Okay.
I was a heel at that point. Just seemed to come more natural to me, I guess. Once you put the mask on, you can kind of take on a different persona.
Oh, sure.
But anyway,
So did the promoter know that you were underage?
the promoter did not know.
Okay.
The promoter did not know. He just knew that I was trained by Ernest, and back then, again, we're talking no internet back then. So
Right.
we didn't book wrestlers the way we do now. We didn't have Facebook. We didn't have Twitter. If you were getting booked for shows, it was because somebody knew you, and they vouched for you, and they brought you to the show. So
Gotcha.
every night was like a job interview every single night, because you were trying to perform up to the standards that basically your friend had said you could do, and your next booking relied on how well you did that night.
Nice.
So a bad night could cost you a bunch of bookings. But anyway, we went all the way out to Borger. I get there, and I guess word had gotten out that I was underage, and the cops showed up.
What?
And they canceled. We changed our story and said, I was just there to photograph or work the ring or whatever.
Okay.
But I was not able to participate in my first match that night. So my first match was about 3 or 4 months later. I think in March of '97 was when I finally debuted, and that was in Hobbs, New Mexico.
Oh wow.
So.
But you're still 15, right?
I was 16, I think, by that point.
Okay.
So I might be getting dates mixed. Yeah, I was 16, March of '97. That sounds right. So I had quite a while to train and to work, but by that time, I had the opportunity to travel a bit with those guys. I was on the road with them. Certainly not WWF, road worthy stories, but we'd wrestle a couple times a month and drive to Texas and drive to Arizona. So I got to learn a lot before I actually stepped in the ring, and I felt like I was very prepared before I actually had my first match. So
awesome.
That was another big difference between then and now. Is back then it was unheard of to train somebody for a short period of time and then allow them to be in the ring. It was you had to prove you were ready to rock and roll.
Oh yeah. How long was it when you first trained to when you had that first match in Hobbs, roughly?
It was between 8 months and a year, I would say.
Wow.
So and again, not 2 times a week for 2 hours. We're talking 5-6 nights a week for 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah.
So I had a lot of matches that no one ever saw before I ever had my first match.
That first one. So you were still in school at this time, right?
I was not. I dropped out. I didn't say I dropped out. I left school when I was 14. I got my GED. I went to college for a short time later, but
that's still a brutal schedule no matter what. You're doing it, so many times a week for 4 hours.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So when you made your debut eventually in Hobbs, were you still the fireman character?
I was. I think the first night I had the same outfit. They called me the Black Angel. They had kind of last minute decided to put me as a face.
Okay.
My first match was scheduled to be a 5-man handicap tag match. It was 2 heels and then the 3 faces.
Okay.
Last minute, that was the night I learned that anything can happen in wrestling. I got there and they said we want to make it a 6-man. We want to add this guy to the mix. So all that nonsense about being able to script out your matches and plan things well in advance, that is absolutely not true in this business. You have to learn to work on the fly. So we changed it up. We had a 6-man tag match. It went pretty well. I was very, very small. I was maybe 175 by that point in time, and these guys were all well over 250.
Wow. And
then we had a battle royal that night, and I remember that. I got thrown out. And when I got thrown out, I hit there was a speaker for the PA system, and I landed on top of it.
Oh, really?
When I hit it, it took the whole, took the PA system down and pulled the wires out, the sparks, and the whole 9.
No audio.
No audio, knocked the audio out for the show. And it was a really wild crowd that night. I remember people throwing things, and it was an education all in itself. But I remember just feeling like I had conquered the world when I got in the RV to come home that night. There was probably 8 or 9 of us traveling together, and just the entire way home, laying there thinking, I felt like I did what I said I would do.
Mission accomplished.
And that was a big moment.
Nice. So. It was a memorable debut. I mean, you blew up the entire audio for a show.
Yeah, absolutely.
How more memorable of a debut could you get?
Absolutely. I literally tore the house down. So I feel pretty good about that.
Well, some of us may remember LAW, which is a promotion that you started up, Legends and Amateurs of Wrestling. I mean, you were one of the guys who brought this entire company together. How did that come about? Obviously, you mentioned Mosh Pit Mike and Jeff the Ref earlier. How did the whole idea for LAW come about?
So I've known some of these guys forever. Like I said, Mosh and Jeff the Ref I've known since I was 10 or 11. Thunder started wrestling with us probably 15 years ago.
Okay.
Widowmaker right after that. So I had a hand in, I don't want to say I trained these guys because it's not fair. These guys have immeasurable talent. They're all amazing performers. And I think in this business that we all learn from everybody that we encounter. I learn things to this very day
Oh, for sure.
from everybody I've ever worked with or around. But Thunder and I traveled for years and years and years together, all up and down Texas, and everywhere from the north Panhandle all the way to El Paso.
Wow.
Mosh didn't come into the mix as an actual wrestler. He was in college and doing some other things, and so I don't think he actually came in until probably 2001 or so.
Oh, wow.
Jeff the Ref probably about the same time, 2002, 2003, somewhere in there. So at times they all added on, but long story short, LAW, we would work for probably 20 different promoters all over Texas, seen different ranges of success. And what's hard about that is that you're wrestling so far from home, it's not guaranteed that you're going to be able to repeat. The repeat performance is so important in professional wrestling.
For sure.
Without television, you don't have the ability to tell your story on an ongoing basis. And so the first night you're in a town, you're basically introducing yourself, and then you're building your story from that point on.
True.
So some of the promotions, like Global Championship, we wrestled with them for quite a while. We wrestled on television, and we were able to really get some momentum down there. But some of these other guys we were hitting and leaving and maybe working for 2 to 3 times a year. And there's just no way to get any traction. So we always wanted to wrestle in New Mexico. We always wanted to have our own promotion. The LAW was a brainchild of myself, Thunder, Mosh Pit Mike. We called it Legends and Amateurs of Wrestling. We had every intention of mixing both. We wanted a place where up-and-coming wrestlers could develop. They could be trained correctly, learn the right philosophies to our business, but also a place where some of the legends that were no longer on television anymore, some of the guys that we were blessed to get to work with, guys like, Juventud and Jake Roberts and Abdullah the Butcher, where I could bring those guys in and reintroduce them to a new generation.
Nice.
So that was really the idea. Trying to remember dates, but I think we actually launched LAW in 2006.
At that time, how long had it been since there was any wrestling in New Mexico? As far as like a consistent basis, I mean, you're probably talking since the 70s, really.
Yeah, it really was since the days of Mike London.
Yeah.
So, I'm not a wrestling historian per se, but I was told that nobody had run Tingley Coliseum in something like 25 to 30 years.
Oh, wow.
Short of WWF.
Right, of course.
WWE, whatever. I'm a fan from way back, but we knew there was a void to fill. We knew there was a market for it. We knew we had the talent, the right people in place to be able to carry that torch. The athletic commission is it's a tricky situation. So Texas does not have an athletic commission. Colorado does not. Arizona really doesn't.
Right.
Nothing to mention anyway. But New Mexico has a very, very strict athletic commission in place. There are definitely good things and bad things to that. I mean, the athletic commission is designed to help protect the fans and help protect the wrestlers by requiring insurance, by requiring checkups and doctors on hand and all those good things. But unfortunately, they like to lump wrestling with martial arts, with boxing. Yeah, it's like an all-inclusive situation. So a lot of the laws and the rules that are on their books are very antiquated. At the end of the day, you have to draw a lot of people to pay the cost that's associated with running a athletic commission regulated show.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't stop us. Again, I'm fairly stubborn. When I decide I really want to do something, I'm gonna do it, whether it's a good idea at the end of the day or not.
Nice.
So we launched LAW. We got it up and running. We ran a few shows in Socorro at New Mexico Tech.
Okay.
We ran a few shows out, some reservations. That's how I was brought up in wrestling when guys like Ernest and Frank and those were training me. Is the best way to get around the commission is to wrestle on a reservation. They can't touch you there, and it's still close to home. A lot of people made a lot of money doing that throughout the 70s and 80s.
Oh, wow.
So we took a little bit of that. We tried it out. But at the end of the day, what I wanted to do was to run right dead smack in the middle of Albuquerque. I wanted to run Tingley Coliseum because that's where I grew up watching wrestling.
Nice.
Through circumstance, we met with the president of the Albuquerque Thunderbirds basketball league, and they were running their basketball events there at Tingley throughout November. I think it was like November to February, and they were having a hard time drawing enough crowd to really sustain what they were trying to do.
Oh yeah.
Well, they were only using half of the arena, so basically put our heads together. They offered to let us use the other half of Tingley Coliseum after their basketball events had ended, and in return they would provide the arena for free.
Wow.
All we had to do was sell tickets
Nice.
to their events, so we were trying to boost their ticket sales.
So it was a joint. It was a joint. Go to a basketball game afterwards. Watch some wrestling.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
Exactly. Again, on paper, it was a dream come true. You know, I remember driving home that day just thinking, my God, I'm actually going to do this. This is going to happen.
Nice.
We did. We ran 2 shows at Tingley Coliseum. The first night was in November. We drew 1,700 people.
Wow.
Watched us work there. It was an awesome event. I mean, I put months and months into the preparation. There was a lot of work done on the set, on the lighting, on the smoke, and there was lights coming down from the ceiling, the whole 9.
Wow.
We did it up. Unfortunately, though, it was not financially
Affordable.
Yeah, that's the word right there. I lost money on that show.
Wow.
So even with 1,700 people paying to come see us wrestle, by the time that I paid every bill that was involved, I was out some money.
Wow.
It was still worth it. So we did it again. We did it again in February of that year. So we kind of bookended the season for the basketball season.
Oh, okay.
And I think the second time we ran, it was right around 1,000 people showed up. So
Oh, okay.
had really good turnouts. You know, we launched LAW. The funny thing about LAW is we didn't run a lot of shows. You know, I work a lot. I work full time. Believe it or not, Hobo Hank has a full time job. He's not eating out of a dumpster.
Behind a frontier.
Well, no, I like the frontier, but I don't hang out behind it. But you know, life gets in the way, and you know, most of us are married guys. Most of us have children. Most of us have other obligations, and so you have to be realistic at some point. If you're not making money to sustain the machine, you have to shut the machine down.
Right.
What's cool about LAW is that in a very, very short amount of time, I think we were able to make a name for ourselves that was synonymous with quality. Some of the best talent that ever came out of New Mexico was branded with those 3 letters.
Right.
And the fans that we did have, 1,700 people, that broke some records for independent wrestling in New Mexico.
Oh, no doubt, for
You know,
sure.
We ran Tingley the first time, second time. We've done some things in a short period of time that nobody else was able to do, which makes me pretty proud. But our fans were ravenous, man. They believed in the product that we were giving, and they proved to me that the style of wrestling that I love the most, the WWF of the 1980s and early 90s, it's lives on, and
For sure.
whatever came out of my pocket to make that happen, it was well worth it. Those were experiences that I'll never forget.
You would do it again, of course.
I would do it again.
Nice.
Yep.
Well, I think we touched so much about LAW. One thing I really am interested in knowing is, obviously we talked about you being the fireman. How did Hobo Hank come to be?
Hobo Hank, that's a funny story. So I'd been wrestling probably 3 or 4 years by that point. Thunder and I were working for Global Championship Wrestling.
They were based in El Paso?
They're based in El Paso.
Okay.
They still operate. A lot of those guys still operate down there under different banners, but
Okay.
Global Championship was, for lack of a better word, was awesome. That was next to DWO and LAW, that was the most fun I ever had in my career.
Oh, wow.
Hands down. We would go down there. Like I said, it was Thunder and I. We would take Mosh with us. He lived in Las Cruces at the time. So we would drive down there every other Thursday. We would tape 2 television tapings each night, and it was just like Thunder, where they would show one that night.
Oh, and they would say
show.
next one for the next week?
Exactly.
Gotcha.
So we'd have one in the can, and then we'd come back 2 weeks later and pick it
Wow.
up where we left off. So, which, you know, it was an amazing thing at that point in my life to, you know, just to wrestle on television, even though it was only televised, I think, in 4 or 5 states.
Oh, that's still cool.
It was awesome. I mean, to learn wrestling on television is different than wrestling house shows, and to learn how to work with the cameras and the angles and all that.
Oh, I'm sure.
You know, shooting promos when you're live on television, and you can't redo that. But anyway, we would been working down there for probably 6 or 7 months at that time, and the fireman was over. I got a pretty good amount of heat, but Matt Meager was the promoter back then. He wrestled, I think, as the Joker and did some other gimmicks, and then Hurricane Hector was the booker.
Oh, okay.
I know he's still active down there, and
Right.
Hector's if you're from that part of the world, Hector's a great guy, and he's a great worker and trainer and all those good things. So seek him out if you're looking to get into this business in that part of the world. One night after I had worked, they pulled me aside and they said, I had really long hair at the time. It went halfway down my back, and they said, you're really good. We'd like to try something with you if you'd be interested. We would like to make you a hobo and call you either Hobo Hank or Hobo Joe or Hobo Bob or something. So you could see how well thought out this whole situation was, right? But basically they said, we'd like to put the world championship belt around a hobo. So I'm like 20 years old at the time, 19, 20, wrestling on TV. The guys that they were bringing down, and we were selling out this arena. It wasn't an arena. It was like an event center or something. We would sell 600 seats to this thing. Every other Thursday was packed, and they were bringing in guys like Juventud Guerrera. We were working with Conan from WCW. Wow. Eventually, Rey Mysterio joined up with them.
Wow.
So I'm thinking, my God, yeah, I could be the world champion of this if I do what they want. That's pretty cool. So of course I said, absolutely, I'll do it. So I'm driving home, and the next week follows, and then in my mind I just kept thinking, I can't do this. I cannot, with good conscience, go out on television, because they wanted me to pretend to be drunk.
Oh, okay.
And just a vagrant, and I'm thinking, man, I can't do this in front of kids. That's not what wrestling is about. I was taught to always respect the lineage and the history.
Oh, okay.
So, never do anything that would compromise that. So it really bothered me. And so I used to, so back in those days, I was a manager at Pizza Hut in Socorro. And Thunder and those guys would pick me up from Socorro on my way to go to El Paso. But I woke up about 5 o'clock that morning, the morning of the show, and I said, I just can't. I can't make this happen. So
couldn't do the character.
Couldn't do the character. So I pick up the phone and I call Hurricane Hector. And I said, Hector, man, I hate to do this, I trust your guys' instincts and whatever, but I just can't do this. I cannot go on television and pretend to be drunk and influence kids in that way. And Hector he's a great guy, and he said, well, the problem is we already put you on the poster. They didn't have a picture of me at the time, but they had the name, and basically I was advertised. And that is the golden rule of wrestling, the one that you just don't break, because when it's advertised, you deliver.
Gotcha.
Right. So he said, if you want to, you don't have to pretend to be drunk. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do, but can you suck it up, and can you make it happen? At least one time, show up and make it right.
So was this just the debut of the character, or were you actually getting a title shot at this show?
This was a debut of a character.
Okay, gotcha.
But it was televised. So,
yeah, still.
I knew there was no turning back. So anyway, Hector taught me off the ledge, and I said, okay, I trust you, I'll do it, but I'm not gonna do it in a way that makes me uncomfortable. So I hung up the phone. Again, it's like 5:15 in the morning by this time. I had minutes to get ready for work, so I opened my closet and I start digging around in the spare closet and everything, and I'm just grabbing things at this point. And I reached in and I found an orange jacket, which is the orange jacket that I wear to the ring to this very day.
Wow.
I found a hat. I found a wife beater, jeans. Within 3-4 minutes, I had put together what has come to be Hobo Hank. So we jump in a van. I think Thunder picks us up in a van. We're driving down El Paso, and I'm telling the guys this story as we're going down there.
Are you still not happy about having to do it?
Yeah, I still had some reservations. I felt better about it, but I just wanted to make sure that this thing was buried and gone.
For sure.
So Mosh and Thunder, they come up with the bright idea. They say, well, sabotage it. Do it wrong. If you do just the dumbest things you could possibly think of in that ring, the people aren't going to go for it. They'll reject it, and then this will get thrown out, and you can go on with the firemen. So for the next 2.5 hours in the car, all we did was think about the worst things I could possibly do. So that night on television, I went out with my shopping. I had a shopping cart at that time with the sign, my original "We'll Wrestle for Food" sign. And
yes.
I come out and the crowd looks at me and they have no idea what to make of me. They're looking at me like I'm insane. And the guy I was working with, I got in the ring and I hadn't had an opportunity to see him before the show. And I basically just told him, whatever I do, just go with it. And to his credit, he was very cool and said, yeah, no problem. So in the middle of the match, I got out. I went to the concession stand and I got a hot dog. I ate the hot dog. I shoved it in his face. I grabbed his manager. He had a manager at the time, and I stole his shoes. Just anything I could think of that was nuts. And when it was over, when I pinned him, the crowd erupted.
Really?
It was insane. Everybody on their feet. The Hobo Hank chants started that night, the very first night out of the gate. The response was ridiculous. So I came back, and of course I'm shaking my head the whole time thinking, what did I just do? I got to the back and Matt and Hector pulled me aside and they said, you just became a star tonight.
Nice.
There was no turning back. A couple years later, I went up to work in the Panhandle again for Chris Youngblood, and I started off as the fireman up there again, and at some point they were trying to boost attendance, and I told them, well, I have one idea, and so we relaunched Hobo Hank, and Hobo Hank got over just as hard, just as fast as it did down in El Paso. So it is what it is. These days, I wouldn't take it back for anything.
For sure.
That was a blessing in disguise to find that character and to be cast as that.
Did you ever win the title?
For Global, no, unfortunately. So Global was just rocking and rolling. Let's just be here's a lesson for promoters out there. Global was on fire. Like I said, every week 600 people plus.
Yeah.
We had wrestlers coming in from Mexico, guys coming in from television, just printing money at that point in time. And they decided to take the show on the road. They came into Mexico. We ran a show in Alamogordo. And that show cost them thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars.
And we know why.
We know why. Not to say that was the end of Global, but progressively Global did start to dissipate after that point in time.
Oh, jeez.
So I never had the opportunity to pick up that title.
Bummer.
A lot of the organizations that I worked for back in the day were really, you just hit them and leave. You'd wrestle there maybe once a month or maybe a couple times a year. So you never had the opportunity to progress that character or that storyline to the point where you could be a major player.
Yeah. It
was still the old days of wrestling in their minds, where it was very sectioned off. You only worked for them. And the champion had to be somebody that they could trust 100% to be there every single event.
Of course.
So, no, unfortunately, I never had that opportunity. I never really felt that Hobo needed a belt. I never, not to say, it's fun to carry a championship belt. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It is, but, Jake the Snake Roberts, that's my idol. And I mean, not in a personal manner.
Right.
Jake has some problems. I've met the guy, but in the world of wrestling, there's nobody I think that ever did it better than he did.
Yeah.
And I think you see a lot of him in me with the psychology, the crowd psychology that I employ. But he basically said, if you don't need a belt, why wear one?
Right.
And I never felt I needed one. I was getting over. I was getting booked, high on the card, and a lot of crowd response. So it was never really a thing.
Oh yeah. Well, until you come to DWO, and then you pretty much you're the only wrestler to hold Destiny Wrestling's Extreme Tag Team, which you held solo for a little bit.
Correct.
And heavyweight title. Finally, you win the heavyweight title. Day of Destiny 6. You and Joe Quesada in a cage match, which I consider the best Destiny Wrestling show to this day. And just because the fan reaction there. How was it going into that match? Again, you had the momentum behind you like crazy, just with the fans fully behind Hobo Hank, and eventually winning the title. How did that whole moment feel?
It was amazing. I don't know how to describe that, really. Again, when you think back to being 8 years old, 7 years old, and that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
Not to say that I made a living doing it, not to say I made a WWF, but I did what I wanted to do. And, again, I'm not an old guy, I'm 33, but if you do the math, I've been in the business for 18 years
Right.
now.
More than half your life almost.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been wrestling longer than I haven't been wrestling, I'll put it that way.
Yeah, jeez.
It takes a toll. Your body hurts. And you know that there is a finite amount of time available to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then you add to that the other factors, everyday life. I got to go to work. I've got to take care of my child. I've got to, be there for my wife.
Of course.
You start weighing out what's important versus what's more important. And so even as I arrived in Destiny Wrestling, I knew, I'm not hanging up the towel. This is not Hobo Hank's retirement speech or anything. I still got a couple more good years in me, I believe.
Yes.
But, you just start to realize that someday it has to end. So the moments that you have, there's a lot of things that I wanted to do still in this business when I got to Destiny, and a lot of them I've been able to do during that time.
Nice.
So I'm very, very appreciative to everybody in Destiny Wrestling, from management all the way down to the fans, for supporting me and allowing me to do those things and live out my dream. But yeah, I mean, to highlight Day of Destiny, biggest show of the year, main event, in a cage.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Had you ever been in a cage match?
I have not. That was my first and only cage match.
Wow.
To date. Hopefully I'll get to do that one more time before I hang up the boots. But
Nice.
Quesada's an awesome wrestler.
Yeah.
He's just a genuinely good guy. He's got his head in the right place in him. He knows what this business is about, and that's delivering what the fans want.
For sure.
Every night. It was one of those situations. It was too easy. It was too easy to go out there and do what needed to be done to make that match what it was. But the build-up was great. I mean, the vignettes we shot,
Yeah.
and all that. That was a lot of fun going out and doing all those. And I just felt it really felt cool. I remember sitting in the parking lot waiting for that show, that afternoon, and there was a lot of talk on Facebook leading up to it, and a lot of chatter just amongst people that I even knew. And watching people arrive to that show, it was obvious that they had been waiting for weeks and building up, and just a picture of the fact that people were sitting at home waiting to experience what we were about to deliver.
Oh yeah.
That's what made that special, more than anything. So I remember sitting on top of the cage when I got the belt at the very, very end of the night. It was like everybody in the arena had been given what they wanted to see, and it was amazing. And I was just humbled to be a part of that.
Yeah, great moment, man. Like I said, that's hands down my favorite show altogether. I think that entire card was spectacular, topped off with you finally getting your revenge on Joe and winning the title. That was a perfect end to, I think, any show that we've ever done. It was great, man. I don't know what else to say. Still to this day, people still ask about Hobo Hank. I know Joel will ask me. Joel absolutely hates the Death Rage Cartel for what happened at Day of Destiny 7 with your wife. Right. And he's still badmouths Gringo Loco and Death Rage Cartel on Facebook pretty much on a monthly basis, just to let you know in case you didn't.
I did not. That's great.
Still upset over what happened. But again, you've said this is not the end. Hobo Hank will eventually come and wrestle again. And I think everybody's definitely anticipating it. Pretty much, you've had such a great career. There's been so many matches, so many opponents. Do you have a favorite match, favorite opponent of all time?
That's a hard question. Hundreds of matches. That was a great moment for sure. I've had a lot of great moments. For a long time, Thunder and I worked so many times.
Mm-hmm.
The guy's like a brother to me. We've traveled together. So wrestling him was just so simple. We never talked in the ring. That's fun. That's something that maybe you want to hear behind the scenes of Hobo Hank. Hobo Hank doesn't talk in the ring so much. I learned to wrestle the old school way. I learned to wrestle on the fly, and he did as well. And so I love working with him. But man, not to take anything away from him, but Mosh Pit Mike. I don't know if it's because we've been best friends for over 20 years, or because I had the opportunity to train him, or just because he's just that good. But anytime I'm in the ring with him, it is just magic. I love it. I've heard him do interviews where he's kind of alluded to the same thing, but the show we did, or the match we did at Hard Knocks, I want to say it was 2010 maybe, when I got the night I won the hardcore championship.
Oh yeah, okay.
That was one of my favorite matches of all time.
Was it really?
Yeah, it was. Just because it was so much fun. Nothing was planned. I mean, zero. There was no pre-thought. Just a bunch of crap underneath the ring, and we went out there and just fed off of everything that each of us had done. And that match was so intense and so emotional. The last minute of it was probably one of the highlights of my career. The way the fans reacted to. I think if I remember right, he put me on a table and I got off. I punched Filthy Phil in the mouth and I hit Mosh with a guitar. And I suplexed him through the table. Just, the buy-in, I could feel the crowd was along for every piece of that.
How awesome.
And when they finally hit the mat for the 3 count, the place exploded, and it felt, legitimately amazing. You just can't do that it doesn't matter how good one guy is in the ring, you have to have 2. It takes 2 people to put a show on. So I'm going to have to go with Mosh. I'm hoping in the years I have left, especially with DWO, that I have the opportunity to work with him a couple more times, because
definitely.
We wrestled at that effed up event.
Yeah.
With the fire he threw fire in my face, I believe.
Right.
I thought that was a great match. There wasn't a lot of people in the crowd that night, so not a lot of people got to see that one. But I thought that was a 5-star match. Mosh and I got match of the year 2 years in a row.
You did, yep.
Benny Benavides, got to throw him some credit because he was the 3rd man in the second year. But I just think anytime that he and I are together, the potential's there.
Awesome.
To do something cool.
That's great. Well, again, you're loved by everybody here in New Mexico. Anybody who's been to a live New Mexico show in the last 5 years or so. Anything you want to say to the fans before we sign off today?
Absolutely. I mean, I just want to take the moment to thank everybody for their continued support. Wrestling does not exist without fans.
For sure.
So when you ask what my biggest moments are in the career, that's an easy question. The voting, anything that involves fans voting, because that's legitimate. We could put a title on anybody and they're the champion, and that's just the way wrestling works. But
true. At
the end of the day, when you put up a ballot and anybody can vote on it and they take the time to do that, that's pretty amazing. And so the fact that I've been able to be the fans' favorite 3 years in a row, and wrestler of the year, feud of the year, and the matches of the year, that I really, that means a lot to me.
That's awesome.
Honestly does, because that's why we do it. Anybody that's trained correctly in the world of wrestling will tell you that the whole point is to deliver what the fans want to see, and so I feel when we get that response that we've done our jobs.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Hobo. I know you have such a busy schedule to come down here. Again, such a pleasure to have you and share your stories with what you've learned and your training and everything like that. Definitely, I don't even think we touched on a lot of it. So we'll do round 2 eventually at some point.
Sure, I'd love to be back anytime.
Awesome. And again, thank you guys for listening to Ring Awareness. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Until then, this is Adam Merrick signing off.